Hello D1. All right, so in today's pictorial, we are going to be talking about the ocean, or also known as the marine biome. And so the ocean is actually a really vast place. Vast meaning really great in size. So the ocean covers all the places in which there is not land, right? So we have all these masses of land, the continents, and the ocean is surrounding it. And so actually the ocean is the largest biome out of all of the biomes. It takes up so much of the space. And it actually takes up about 70% of Earth. So that means it's covering 70% of the Earth's surface, right? So we have all this land, and that remaining 40% or 30% is taken up by land, but 70% of the Earth is made up of water. It's also really important to note that this water is usually salty. As you guys know in your reading, there is salt in the water, and that's due to sediment and all that good stuff. And so now when we're looking at the climate, remember when we're talking about climate, we're talking about weather. And the ocean's really unique because its climate contributes, meaning plays a part or helps, or as I said, influences or plays a part on the climate of the other biomes. And so, for example, the ocean plays a part in the climate of the tundra. It plays a part in the desert. All the other biomes, the ocean plays a part in their climate. It provides water for the biomes. I apologize, I know this is kind of a thick marker, so thank you for being flexible, but it provides water for other biomes, and that is because of evaporation. So we've talked about evaporation when we've talked about the desert, and so what happens is the water is comes up into the air, and then that's when it evaporates, and then it goes through the water cycle, and then it is reused. So like we talked about with the desert, that water is evaporated from the ocean, and then when we have rain in the desert, that is where it is coming from. And so just keeping that at mind. And so when we're looking at the poles, it is below freezing. So when we're looking at the Earth, these are the poles. So this is where it's going to be freezing, below freezing actually. And so that's something that's really good to keep in mind. And it's also important to note that when we're looking at the ocean, the sun only hits the top. The sun only hits the top of the ocean. So that top layer of the ocean, that is the only place that the sun is hitting, which means that it's pretty cold in the ocean, especially as you get deeper, and we'll talk more about that. Now let's go ahead. Let's dive into the different zones of the ocean. And so we're looking at the zones. You're probably wondering, Ms. Walsh, how many zones are there? There are 3 zones. And so our first zone, which is going to be the top zone, or that top layer, it is called the euphotic zone. And so what happens here with the euphotic zone is this is where the light from the sun will hit. And so the light will penetrate meaning it will filter through 600 feet deep. So 600 feet, the light from the sun is shining through. And so that's still fairly deep. That means that you do not need that in 600 feet deep into the ocean that you can still see. Things are still visible. And so then when we continue on, as we further move down the ocean, we come across then the dysphotic zone. And this is our second zone. And the dysphotic zone, there's not enough light. This is when we're past that 600 feet, and there's just not enough light here. This is also called the twilight zone. So twilight is that like time of night, evening, when things really start to get dark and it's not easy to see. And then this goes about to 3,000 feet deep. So this again is getting pretty deep into the ocean. And then finally, after our dysphotic layer, if we keep going down and exploring, we will come across our last zone, which is the aphotic zone. And we know A means no, and pho means light, and so this is no light. This is pitch black. This is as dark as it's going to get. This is also known as the midnight zone. So now you're thinking midnight, oh, it is dark, right? So midnight zone is the nickname for the aphotic zone. It is the deepest part of the ocean. And because it's the deepest, it is also the coldest and the darkest. So it's the darkest and coldest of all those different zones. And so that is really important. And it's also important to know that in this zone itself, it has 80% of all habitats. And so this is really important to know because in the ocean, there is still so much that has not been discovered. And so to know that there's 80% of all habitats located just in this zone is pretty incredible. And knowing that we still have so much more to discover is also pretty incredible in itself. Then we're going to go ahead now, we're going to move on to plants and vegetation, right? And so there are two main purposes for the plants and vegetation in the ocean. Not only is it for food, so the animals can have some food, eat, but it's also for shelter. So if you've seen Finding Nemo, possibly, the clownfish, they stay in the anemone, and so the anemone is an example of a plant or vegetation that's in the ocean. And so not only can it certain plants be used for food, but it's also being used for shelter, somewhere for them to stay safe. And so some examples include coral, algae, which you guys had talked about yesterday in your reading. Algae is really, really important because it helps provide oxygen through photosynthesis. There is phytoplankton. And it's also really important to note that the plants and vegetation, they only live in the euphoic zone. And that is because that is where the light hits. The light doesn't hit in the other zones, and because there is no light in these zones, there is no way for these plants to live, right? And so plants need light to live, and so in the euphoic zone, that is where we're going to see our plants and vegetation. And so that's really important to note, that they're only going to be in the top zone, the euphoic zone. Now we're going to go ahead, we're going to look at our animals. And it's really important to note that there are two types of animals here in the ocean. So first of all, there are mammals and there are fish. Mammals and fish are completely different. They have different needs for their bodies. Their bodies are made differently and they have different organs, different body coverings, and so on as a result. Mammals are also warm-blooded versus fish, and so that is something to also keep in mind. And so, for example, a mammal we may see are blue whales. We'll also see walruses, dolphins, and manatees. And there are so many more, but this is just to name a few. And now we're looking at fish. There are so many in the ocean. So one would be anglerfish, which are those guys with that little light hanging from their head. Again, he was, you might have seen that in Finding Nemo. A shark is a great example. We'll also see things like eels. We'll see tuna and so on. And then on top of that, there is another category of animals we'll see, and they are called mollusks. And with mollusks, we'll see animals with shells. This is typically where we're going to see them have like a hard exoskeleton, and so we're going to see things like clams, oysters, and snails. Alrighty. And now we can go ahead, we're going to move on to our interesting facts. And so one of the interesting facts is that there are over 1 million plants and animals discovered here. So over 1 million of all the plants and animals on our planet have been discovered here in the ocean. And again, there's still so much we have not discovered in the ocean, and so it's really incredible to think how many more plants and animals there may still be. It is also important to note that most, not all, but most mammals have what's called blubber, which is kind of like an extra layer of fat to keep warm. So like we've said, in the ocean it gets really, really cold, especially the further you move down because the sun only hits the top. And so this blubber helps these animals to keep warm. Again, this is for most mammals, not all. Some animals like otters, for example, they have fur, while most mammals like whales and walruses, they have blubber to keep warm. And so that is going to be it for the ocean. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye, D1.